guys, and welcome back to the Motor Recon podcast. I'm your host, Adam. I'm actually joined again today by Rob, but if you are watching this, you won't actually be able to see him because what we are doing today is a virtual tour of McLaren Technology Centre. They do offer this feature if anyone ever wants to check it out on their website. And what we're going to do is just go through a couple of the cars that they've got out in their atrium, that they call it, and just talk about everything that we go past and just a bit of the history perhaps about some of those things. So, as a lot of you probably do know, McLaren as a automotive car, road car company is actually quite young. It's sort of 2009, 2010, excluding the F1. But for racing, they've been going for a hell of a lot longer than that. Sort of the 50s into the 60s when they became a racing team in Formula One. So for those of you that are watching, we are going to take a guided tour around and click through on Google Maps. For those of you listening, obviously we're going to talk about those cars that we do see. But I do urge you to go and have a go at this. So the first one, we're going to walk in through the door. And what we've got here on the left-hand side, we are greeted by the McLaren MP4-12C in chrome silver. Now, a lot of you will probably know this car anyway. This is obviously a road car. It was produced from 2011 to 2014. It's just a two-door coupe, 3.8 litre V8, and producing 620-ish horsepower, was it? Or 660, I can never remember. With a 7-speed dual-clutch gearbox. Now, I was a fan of the 12C when it first started out. Did you like it off the offset, or did you prefer to wait?
For me, it was always nearly, but not quite.
Yeah.
And I think the 650 was obviously what the 12C was destined to be. The 12C was almost, I wouldn't say half done, that's certainly not fair, but I think that the 12C was certainly the beta version. Yeah. And once we got to the 650, McLaren found their style and they've run with it ever since.
Yeah, I'm going to say because, as a first hit, it certainly was not a bad car. I can't knock them for it.
No, not at all, no. But if you look at the front end of it, for example, you can see where the 650S improved on that, and they've just kept that design from their P1 hypercar all the way down through to their sort of like 540s.
Yeah, it's definitely stuck with it, and which not a bad thing because it was definitely
no, not at all. Well, as you say,
yeah.
BMW have their their unmissable sort of kidney grille. It's one of those things where you now look at the nose of a McLaren and it could only be a McLaren. They have their own unique style now.
Yeah, which I very much like. For those of you who probably listen quite a lot, you probably know that McLaren is my favourite car brand at the moment. But we'll get onto that a bit later on. So what we do is we're going through into the atrium now, is here, and if we just look to the right, we can see, we think it's a 2012 car. We can't quite tell, but I think looking by that and the livery and the number, it's a 2012 Formula One car. Judging by that.
But as you say, I'm just going to use it as an opportunity to talk about 2011, really, just because it's a similar sort of style.
Yeah.
2011 was the year, obviously, Jenson Button famously won the Canadian Grand Prix in the wet. Obviously, now they're offering F1 access. I think it's free for like 30 days now.
It is.
So you can look at archived races and things like that. That's one of the ones I would certainly implore you to watch. And also, I think it took they took a second victory in 2011 with Lewis Hamilton, was it?
Yeah.
In China. So again, that might be well worth a watch if you're a McLaren fan. If you want to know about any of the others that we really want to see, or you may want to watch on F1 Access, you can just listen to, was it a couple of podcasts ago?
Two weeks ago, yeah, that was 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So go back and listen to that one if you want to look at some of the more interesting Formula One races. So just a little bit of history. So we'll go around here. So we flip round to the left over here, and what we've got is, this is actually Bruce McLaren's first car. So for those of you that don't know what that is a 1929 Austin. Now, he got that car when he was 13. His dad bought that car for 110 Australian dollars. Now, he at the time, it was actually bought in pieces, and he convinced his dad to actually race this car. And he managed to somehow get it past its top speed of what was 72 miles an hour, which does sound a lot for 29. And he managed to get it up to he managed to get it up to 87 miles per hour. Now, according to this, what he did was he actually sussed out which was the best time to change gear and marked it on the actual speedometer when to change up to certain gears, just so he could actually make the most of the car. So I think that's pretty impressive that he could get that little old thing up to 87 miles per hour. And he obviously was, even at 13, he was very engineering driven.
You could see that even from a young age, he was destined to develop and make fast cars. I think that was abundantly obvious. And it's also incredible. I don't know whether that's a reproduction or not, because if it's not a reproduction, it's in immaculate condition.
I suspect if it's not, that it would have been restored at factory here.
Yeah.
It would make sense.
So it's really cool to see.
Yeah. So what we've got here next to this, now this is sort of from your 60s era of Formula One, where they went a bit nuts with the aerodynamics.
Yeah,
so just get a better view there.
This was this was sort of like from the early days of experimenting with new aero designs. So wings weren't all that commonplace prior to this sort of design. And if you look at sort of like 60s eras, you're seeing these stilt wings sprouting up all over the shop.
Yeah, and you can tell that they were obviously very early on in their evolution, because I know wings are technically this anyway, but it's very much just an aeroplane wing in terms of shape, just put slightly, but obviously upside down, just so it has the negative effect rather than the lift effect.
Yeah, as you say, but in a lot of ways, other than the wings, it looks very standard for the era, just sort of like your monocoque strap, engine behind the driver, standard sort of stuff.
Yeah, it's a fairly crazy looking machine. We have actually seen this quite a few times going up the hill at Goodwood, and the sound on these old cars is pretty impressive. I'll give them that. So let's.
Yeah, and obviously you'll notice this is the livery that McLaren have returned to after all these years now.
Yeah, they're back to the orange
after spending
again.
So many years in the Marlboro spec, and then in the West spec, and then in the silver and red spec, they finally found their way back to what I believe is where they belong, which is sort of the orange papaya.
Yeah, back in as the McLaren Orange it was called as well. That's what it was always named as well, wasn't it? Just quickly on to the next one. If we look in the background, you can actually see a 12C Spider hidden away in the little sort of miniature showroom over there, I guess. I'm not sure how long ago McLaren allowed this to happen in terms of the tour, but obviously if it's a lot of 12Cs, probably quite a while.
Yeah, and as you'll notice as well, there's not anything further than 2013 lined up in there either.
No, which would make sense. If you do actually go on Google Maps and go up to, you can drive down the long driveway into the MTC on Google Maps, and if you come out the door at that point, there is a P1 and a 650S, but they do not feature on the virtual tour, so it must be from slightly before. Just looking on next one we've got here, this is not one I recognise at all. Number 12 in Yardley,
me neither.
The Yardley McLaren livery, which it did leave us to speculate that this potentially could have been IndyCar perhaps, but those.
I'm not actually sure. It's not one. It's a livery I actually recognise.
No, I've never watched IndyCar in my life, so I'm not sure if that could potentially be it or not. But for those of you who do know or are fans of IndyCar, you'll have to just let us know in the comments. We do apologise on that one there, but nevertheless, it's quite a cool looking car.
I think the next one we're going to talk about is an instantly recognisable car. So this is the number 5 McLaren. I think it's the N23, something like that. That might be the code. But long story short, it's obviously the car that took Emerson Fittipaldi to his World Championship in 1974. It had a Cosworth V8 in the back, I believe. And really much to say, and it's a cracking car.
And this is the era of Formula One, where this is where you'd start to perhaps recognise it as actually an F1 car. So they're getting the big front splitters low down and on. They've got the fixed wings at the back, and obviously they're getting a bit more to what you may recognise as Formula One cars of today. It is actually in a red and white Texaco livery, which again I don't know how long they kept that for, but it's not something I've seen on the McLaren other than this one.
No, I don't think it was something that stuck around for that time. And I think by the time you get to sort of James Hunt's victory in 1976, I think that was a Marlboro livery. Yeah. So I think things have moved along quite a lot. But to be fair, there isn't all that much difference between the two. It's still just red and white.
Yeah, very similar in terms of design. It's just a slightly different area. What we're going to do here
interestingly interestingly to note about that one is obviously the overhead intakes were banned shortly after 1970. I think it was halfway through the 76 season the overhead intake was banned. So you'll notice for this next era coming along, you've got the roll hoop over the top where they hook the cars up, but they don't actually have those overhead intakes. Their intakes are elsewhere.
Yeah, I didn't actually know that. That's good to. I did wonder why they'd obviously gone on this era.
Yeah.
So just coming on now to the next one. If we move slightly up further into MTC, we come to a lineup of 3 very iconic cars here. Now, this is arguably one of their most famous liveries. Now, they have been taken off due to certain rules, I'm guessing. But these are the Marlboro years now. So Marlboro, this is when they started to sponsor McLaren, and they got the very famous...
Well, I might add as well, on these 3 as well, these are a prime example of the massive, whopping great turbo era as well.
Yeah, well, the cars are just insane.
Ironically, obviously in a lot of ways they aren't very similar to the current era, but in some ways, as in they are sort of they are V6 turbos, so they share something in common with the modern era of McLaren.
Yeah, so they're going a bit back in time, aren't they, with these ones?
Yeah.
So we've got number...
Sorry,
yeah, go on.
No, go on. If you go from left to right then.
No, so on the left here we've got the number 7, but I was just going to move it slightly further back, just over here, so we can get a bit of a better picture of that exact one. So can have it on there. So that one was driven by Watson. I think it was James Watson, wasn't it, who drove that car?
Yeah, that one was Watson. Yep.
And then we've got over here. So this is when they're probably the more famous drivers coming. So the one in the middle here, number 8. This is Alain Prost.
Oh no! I think the one in the middle here is actually Niki Lauda, number 8.
Oh, sorry, it's the one on the end that's Prost, isn't it? Yeah, there we are. So yeah, there we are. Niki Lauda, sorry.
Obviously, Lauda won the championship in 1984 with this famous comeback. Obviously, we all know that Niki Lauda was he was a 3-time Formula One world champion. He retired in the late 70s, I believe, after winning his second world championship. Went into business doing things elsewhere, returned to Formula One and won the championship again in the 80s to prove that even in his sort of older years, he still clearly had it.
Yeah, he still knew exactly what he was doing.
Mm.
Not sure I understand.
Oh, Siri's kicking in.
Yeah. I find particularly interesting about this 84 car as well is the 3 rear wings that you have. So clearly, this is a sign that aero experimentation has been moving along quite significantly as well. These are also carbon fibre chassis as well, I think.
They were, yes. I was just looking at some of these on the internet prior to going on here, and yeah, this is sort of where the carbon fibre started to get a bit more introduced into the cars. You can probably see it actually down there.
And the number 2 McLaren next to it, I think that was one of the McLarens that Alain Prost won the world championship in as well.
It was. You are correct there. I have to say, actually, to be fair, these are some of my favourite looking Formula One cars. I do love the Marlboro livery. It's a real shame they've had to take it off on these cars.
Yeah, I mean, these are, in some respects, I do like them, but in some respects, I don't, as in I believe they were very big and heavy, and obviously very turbo laggy, given that it was the 80s.
Yeah, I'm just going purely off the look. Yeah.
I think they're wildly different to what Formula One has been over the years. It's a unique era in Formula One, for sure.
No, yeah. I was just purely going from a looks basis. I think from looks alone, they're some of my favourite looking of the McLaren racing cars. But then we come on to my absolute favourites here. So not the first one here, just the second one, but we'll get onto that in a second. So this one here on the left is the MP4 2, the number 1 car. So this was from 1985 season of Formula One.
Okay.
Well, 84 and 85, to be fair. It didn't really change much between the two. But this particular one here does look like it was from 84. Yeah, 84. And who was the driver on that one? So that was again Prost, who drove this car. I'm just looking at some of the stats on these things as well. Just 800 brake horsepower. I can't believe back then.
They had obviously qualifying spec for the engines, which gave them the full bore, but I believe they turned them down for the race because if they ran them at full power for the whole race distance, they'd be blown apart.
Yeah, I'm just looking at that. So for that they did actually run it up to 800, but it was reduced down to 650 brake horsepower. For the actual race, which kind of does make sense. You don't want your car to absolutely obliterate. But one thing I will have to say that this is actually impressive. So 540 kilograms. Obviously, this was back then, and when they qualified with 800 horsepower, that must have been one of the lairiest cars ever, really, to have a go in.
Well, you got to consider as well. Back then, as well, it was still a full manual gearbox. It's all madness.
I know. Doing that with a manual gearbox, proper clutch and everything like that, driving 800 horsepower for a flying qualifying lap, then it does make you appreciate that the boys back then, they really knew how to drive. Not discrediting.
Well, I just think the skills some of the skills have remained the same, such as racecraft, as in where to put your car and wheel-to-wheel combat. I don't think that ever really changes. What has changed is the skills a driver requires to keep on top of the car. I think it might be less about brute strength these days and more about sort of mental intelligence hugely plays into things these days as well. Being able to manage the situation, all of the settings you need to keep on top of.
Yeah, I was just going to say that because there's a lot of stuff now you're sort of dealing with, like mid-corner, you might want to change the fuel mix or the fuel level in some sort of area or adjust the traction control slightly or anything like that just to make sure you can get the fastest lap possible. I
think the mental gymnastics they need to do these days to keep on top of the cars and how complicated they are, I think makes up for. I think they're just as skilled these days as they were in the past. I just think the skills might be slightly different. That's all.
They are going faster as well in many respects. Yeah. But this one actually coming up next here, the number 2. This just again purely just on a looks basis alone is my absolute favourite Formula 1 car. With all the Marlboro stickers back on it, so it doesn't look so plain and empty as it does now. But that's my favourite Formula 1 car. Also as well, Honda powered as well, which.
Yeah, so this was 1989, I believe, and I think the one we're looking at here is an Alain Prost example.
It is, yeah.
Obviously. So again, you're right, Honda Power's in there. Another thing to note as well, I believe this is a return to natural aspiration as well. So this is when we left the turbo era for the first time and we went back to natural aspiration.
That's actually good to know. I've probably improved the sound significantly, I think, especially when they started to get to these bigger engines.
Yeah. You can tell that, obviously, I think these were even V12s. Don't hold me to it, but yeah, I think they went to V12s.
No, that would be cool if they did, because I've, again, seen a couple of these cars go up the hills at Goodwood. Not a particular one, unfortunately, I don't think. But the noise on the old boys F1 cars, they are absolutely insane.
Yeah, the early 90s, I think, I'd say from 1989 to 1992, those are my favourite cars to see go at Goodwood for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. Again, just because of the noise. The noise is something to behold.
Yeah.
So, they've actually got one here. They put McLaren stickers on it rather than Marlboro. But so we've got here. So again, we're moving on now to another 3. So what we've got here, again, still all in the Marlboro livery. But slightly different things. They've got Shell on there as a sponsor now. Still Honda powered. But again, so these are...
all, I will say, they are Honda powered up until the final one on the right. The number 8 McLaren you see on the right is 1993. And that's the first year after this where they weren't Honda powered and significant reduction in performance, actually. As in the car, unfortunately, wasn't as competitive as in previous years.
Well, it was like a Cosworth engine, which at the time was Ford, by the look of it. It's got a big Ford badge on the side.
It wasn't an exclusive engine either. I think the Benetton at the time might have also had that engine in the back of it. Again, don't hold me to it, but I think the point is where with Honda they had an exclusive engine supplier. Unfortunately, didn't have that luxury, and obviously today they don't have that luxury either.
No.
They had Honda for a while, but due to bad performance, obviously. They're now the supplier of AlphaTube and Red Bull.
Yeah, which it is a shame, but I think it's obviously good that keep costs down as well. I guess in this era, which is a big thing that comes into it. So the one that I know is the number 1 car in the middle, which looks like the 1988 car. Now these are the cars that they were being designed by Gordon Murray by this point, which I didn't know he'd come into McLaren that early on.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether the middle one's 1988 again, because it's got the overhead intake. Hazarding a guess that might be early 90s actually, but I think one of the.
Sorry, no, it is. Sorry, yeah,
yeah,
it's actually 1991, I think. Or sorry.
Yeah, that looks about right. I think the most interesting thing to talk about, obviously, is on the far right of these. So the 1993 one, I think it won 5 races this season and was McLaren's most successful cars. But it was the car that Senna took what is arguably the greatest lap, the greatest opening lap of any Formula One race in history. It was at Donington Park in 1993, the European Grand Prix. And I think he went from 6th into the grid to leading in a single lap. It was in the wet and it was a brilliant bit of driving.
I might have to go and watch that actually.
Yeah, but it was I'd say it's another thing I would implore you to go and watch. Probably if you've got F1 access, again, that's probably one to delve into the back catalogue and have a look at if they've got it.
Yeah, probably worth it. I might get that on actually after this. Just one thing to note while we are on these three, just that I've spotted there in the background, what looks like the nose of a McLaren P1 being developed or being built.
Yeah, the beginnings of it all.
Yeah, I just noticed that then as we were going through. I did not see that. Probably just if this is the era just prior to the P1 being unveiled, which looks like it was, then that's actually quite cool to see that they've actually allowed that to be left in the open. So moving on here, what we've got here is the McLaren M8, M8A, I think this one was, which is from sort of McLaren's Can-Am cars. So this particular one is 1968, which obviously quite an old car. But again, we've heard this one at good a few times, and unbelievably loud. I think we've actually watched it with Jenson Button driving it up the hill, which I bet was quite an experience for him. And this was just before Go on.
No, I was just saying, yeah, that was obviously something we've seen quite a lot of Goodwood, haven't we?
Yeah, and they do sound pretty brutish to these Can-Am cars. It would have been cool to see a lot of them all at once, obviously racing around tracks, but I don't think they were quite as entertaining as Formula One in that era. So again, this one, the M8 McLaren, this was sort of in the era just before Ferrari and Lola and a few other of the big names entered to take on McLaren. So it does seem like McLaren were doing this for quite a while before any other big names sort of joined. From the European side anyway, I'm sure plenty of American teams were available. And it did actually win a couple of races, but it doesn't give me any information on which ones, so I do apologise for that. But I really actually like the look of it.
Yeah, and like I say, it's one of those where it is extremely unique looking as far as McLaren's cars are concerned. It's not often you see a closed-wheel racing car from McLaren from this era. So when we see it at Goodwood, it always turns heads.
Oh, it does. Well, mainly when it turns on, but also for as well.
Wow.
So now what we're going to do is we're going to put this now, moving on a little bit further down into MTC, we come across two very, very special cars. Now, again, for those who've been listening for a while, you will know the McLaren F1 is my absolute all-time favourite car. I absolutely adore them, and particularly the orange one, which is on the right. So that's actually a road version. I've always been converted for road use anyway. So what we've got here on the left-hand side is the number 59 McLaren, which actually won the Le Mans race ahead of its other McLaren F1 not teammates, because they were actually different teams, but against the other McLaren F1s, sponsored by UNESCO Clinic, which is from Tokyo. Probably not my favourite livery, if I'm honest.
The thing I find fascinating about that era of Le Mans, obviously, I believe they took the outright victory with that car.
They did, yeah. That was the absolute outright winning car, number 59 there.
Well, because I'm saying, because this is in the era before LMP1 cars started not looking like cars anymore.
Yeah.
You look at the LMP1 category these days, there is no hope in hell any of those cars could be road legal or road worthy. As in, they're like spaceships. They're out of this world. And don't get me wrong, that's really cool. But I always preferred it when the top class of Le Mans were cars that could, obviously, with a lot of work on them, like could buy a McLaren F1 and drive it.
Yeah, well, to be fair, that one on the right, the GTR on the right, is one that was converted for road use, and it's very, very, very similar to the actual Le Mans car. Now, obviously, it has 3 seats in it, but you still need like headphones to be able to speak to the passengers because they're so loud with no sound deadening or soundproofing in the cars. You just simply wouldn't be able to hear your passengers unless you were screaming, which is not ideal on a trip. But I would give a hell of a lot to even sit in, let alone own a McLaren F1. But just a little bit about that car there on the left. It was actually originally the guy who wanted it, the team who wanted it, the Japanese doctor who actually funded that team, and he wanted his name on the side. And so it's good to see that they actually allowed him to do that, and he was obviously dominant and got that victory. So fair play for putting up the money and allowing it to happen. Very clear. Oh, I'm just looking down there in that window as well. In MTC, actually, for those of you who...
Like I was saying,
Hello?
No, I'm not joking aside as well, though. That sort of mentality you mentioned there of them being flexible enough to allow him to put, his livery on the side of it and whatever, that's something that I think Aston Martin should have taken a leaf out of McLaren's book with the Valkyrie. If they need to do some flexibility to get it out on the Le Mans track, for God's sake, do it.
Yeah, there's a lot that they should be doing to get that out on track. You never know; it might come. They just might need another year or so just to get themselves sorted. But I really do hope it does. I was just going to say, for those of you who are listening, obviously, and haven't particularly seen MTC, it is a fascinating building. It's pretty much entirely made out of glass. Like the lift elevators and shafts in the middle are just clear glass with the pods going up and down, and the big lake outside. It's a very pretty building I say pretty architectural marvel, but it allows you, as you're looking round, you can see into all the skunk works of where these cars are maintained. So I'm just looking here now through that window. You can see a lot of wings of different F1 cars in all the different bays. Obviously, assume having maintenance or being built or along those lines.
I believe one of those down there might be a 2007 I saw lurking about, potentially. That's pretty cool.
Trying to zoom in a little bit, but it's hard to see because they are obviously lower down below ground level to see them. But anyway, nevertheless, we'll move on to the next 3. So there's another 3 batch here. So this is when the F1 cars sort of really did change. This is when Mercedes got involved. The livery completely changed. It went to the famous silver and black colour combinations. Let's move left so we can start with the one.
I also think this is when things started to look thoroughly modern.
Yeah. I'm just thinking.
I would say that when you compare the 1993 McLaren to the number 8, which I think was 1998, they are a world apart in the way that they look. As in, one looks a lot more modern than the other.
Yeah. But again, what I said, like you can definitely tell the evolution from the cars we were looking at earlier into these modern ones. Now, this really, really is where you start to see modern F1 cars. They haven't changed that dramatically from this sort of design and shape and size, but they are a lot smaller. Definitely look a lot thinner back then.
But the big thing I noticed as well is, if you look at the good example is the obviously I think it's the 98 Mika Hakkinen on the left. I think that's who that was.
Yeah.
But obviously, the wings are so much simpler than they are these days. Everything's far more intricate.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at the front wing, and it's like got 2 sections to it.
I know, now you've got about 15 different sections, side things coming off. I think even you can tell, look, so just going from left to right, just looking at the front wings, when you jump from the first one to the second one, there's not that much of a difference. But when this is when they start to get a bit wider, a few more little slits on for air to pass through and things like that, but still not very dramatic. But you can start to see the evolutions taking place, which is very interesting to see.
So obviously, it's worth noting as well. Now we're looking at the '98 one with the West McLarens, the black and silver look. They won 2 world championships with Mika Hakkinen in 1998 and 1999. Obviously, David Coulthard also raced for them at that time as well, I believe. So they did see good success in this era as well.
Yeah, they did. And again, this is sort of went probably not the most famous eras for McLaren, but definitely a memorable one.
Now, you said that is the number 9 there, Kimi Räikkönen one from 2005, did you say?
I did. So, yeah.
Interesting to note is that was a quick car. Kimi win races in that car in 2005. Anybody who knows their F1 history will know that Fernando Alonso won the championship that season.
Yes.
The big Achilles heel of the 2005 car was its reliability, unfortunately, for McLaren. If it had been more reliable and just as fast as he could have potentially had that world championship.
Yeah, well, just looking at some of the actual numbers for the for the car number 9 there, driven by Kimi. So it actually only entered 19 races, but out of those 19 races, it won 10 of them, got 18 podiums, and had 7 poles, which on for qualifying, so 7 poles for qualifying. So not bad at all, really.
No, it was a quick car, and as I say, I think it was reliability that was one of the major contributing factors to losing the world championship in 2005. Also worth noting about 05 is that's the final year that the sort of 3-litre V10s were in the back of the cars as well, with those screaming red lines at like 18,000 RPM. The year after they dropped down to V8 in 2006.
Yeah, so that's the year that the sound sort of went down a little bit, but was still very good. But I do remember the V10 sounds, and they were something to behold.
I think everyone can say that the 2005 V8 sound, the 2005 V10 sounds are probably the best sound in F1 ever.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I would never argue with that. They sounded unbelievably good.
Isn't it a McLaren from the early 2000s that also used to hold the Goodwood hill climb record for the longest time until
I think it held it for
took it?
I think it held it for 20 years. I think it was 1999. I think it broke the record up the Goodwood Hill, and then that literally was held right up until 2019. Like I say, the last time I went when the ID broke it. So yeah, it held that record for 20 years.
That was Nick Heidfeld, right?
It was, yes.
Was driving.
Yeah, it was. That was correct, yeah. So just quickly moving on now to the last 4 of the cars. So again, this is another sort of what I'd call a big livery change on the cars. This is when Vodafone became a really big sponsor, and they got their colours all over the car, and also then it was silver underneath. But probably my second favourite livery after the Marlboro, I think, on these two. I still preferred the Marlboro look.
If I'm being honest, this era of McLaren wasn't one that I followed particularly closely. I would say that there is something worth noting, obviously, which on the far left-hand side, a very famous car, which is obviously the one that took Lewis Hamilton to the World Championship in 2008.
It did, yeah.
And it had all the crazy wings and all the sort of amazing aero technology on it, which was restricted heavily for the year. So, obviously, far on the left-hand side was Lewis Hamilton's championship-winning car, and you compare that to the one in from it, which was the 2009 McLaren, where the new changes came in, and you can see just how much they limited aerodynamics from one year to the next.
Yeah, it is a drastic change, isn't it? Like again, these splitters, the front splitters anyway, they're not necessarily the wings so much, but they look at the vast complexity of those compared to the ones we were just looking at. As again, particular Hamilton's winning car, it's even got like a top level splitter plus underneath, and then other various little ailerons and wings on the sides. It's pretty crazy, isn't it? The changes that came on in a matter of a few years.
I think the most important change that I'm not sure whether McLaren ran that system or not, but one of the biggest things that was introduced in the rule changes in 2009 was the KERS system.
Yeah.
In 2009, and I'd say that was the first big step into the current era of power units that we're in now, which is, that was the first step towards what has become an increasingly reliant sort of formula on hybrid technology.
Yeah, just fully managed it. It's pretty crazy though. I think look at the size differences. I don't know if it's just the camera angles of these as well, but that car, the one on the right. But I know. Obviously, we've stood next to quite a few F1 cars. They are quite long, but I think it could just be the fisheye lens on that, just for how. Yeah, it is. But they are extraordinarily long cars.
I say, unfortunately, in '09, McLaren didn't really see a huge amount of success. I don't think they nailed the new regulations as well. Certainly not. Well, obviously, Brawl. But nevertheless, I think Hamilton won a Grand Prix in Hungary, and I think he also won in Singapore in that year as well. So they did see some moderate success with it, but obviously not what they were hoping for.
No, I would agree on that front. I think as well, I'm really hoping as well now, because they've had a long time where they've not been doing very well, and I really want to see them come back. Obviously, unfortunately now the regulations have been delayed another year, where I think they might have done quite well, but you never know. And they also did reasonably well coming into the last season, but we're not going to see. I don't think we'll see any races this year, unfortunately.
The truth of the matter is, where McLaren currently are at the moment, you won't see them back at the top again until they're able to bridge the gap from best of the rest to the top three, which are obviously Mercedes, Ferrari and Red Bull. Until they can start consistently mixing it with them three, there isn't a way back to the winning sort of form that they once had.
No, and I would agree. But anyway, I think that's a good place to wrap us up there. Again, for those of you who are listening, I would urge you to go and have a look around MTC on the virtual tour. It is quite an interesting little thing they've done there. And I'm going to try and find out, see if anyone else has done it, because it might be something else we could talk about in future. But if not, obviously, again, any topics that you want us to talk about, let us know in the comments below or in the in any of the social media links in the description, and we will do that for you. But if not, we will be back again next week with another one. So see you then.
No worries.